Episode 1, I'll Give You This One Chance. Gossip travels fast in Los Angeles, and news of the marriage between the second son of the Patrick family, Axel, to the Whitehead family's daughter spread like wildfire. Everyone was overjoyed. Everyone, that is, except the woman who had been pining after Axel for years. It was 2:00 in the afternoon, and Cole Simpson and Lucia Elrod were right outside the red house where the bride was getting ready for her big day. "Are you almost there?" asked Cole, who was squatting on the ground like a stepping stone, straining under the weight of Lucia. Lucia balanced her small feet on Cole's shoulders, pushing up onto the tips of her toes. Lucia craned her neck back. Her delicate snow-white face was flushed from the effort. "Just a little bit more, and I'll be able to reach the balcony railing." "I can't believe you're going through with this. What on earth could Axel have done to make you so obsessed with him? He's getting married today, and you're here making trouble." Cole and Lucia had been friends for years, but he still couldn't decide if he was doing the right thing helping with Lucia's evil plan. "Don't speak. Save your strength and lift me a bit higher." Lucia was anxious. "If I'm too late, I just know the regret will break my heart." As her friend, it was Cole's duty to save Lucia from a broken heart, so he could only grit his teeth and raise his shoulders with all his might. At the same time, Lucia reached out to grab the railing. This time, she succeeded. "Got it!" With Cole's help, Lucia heaved herself over the railing and onto the balcony. Breathing heavily, she picked herself off the ground and walked inside the house. Inside the room, the bride was already dressed in a snow-white wedding dress. She smiled shyly at her reflection in the mirror, unable to hide the happiness on her face. But Lucia knew that this woman could never deserve Axel. Lucia reached for a brick, and she smashed it down cleanly on the back of the bride's neck. "Ah!" the bride yelped, before collapsing limply to the ground. She had fainted. A victorious smile lit up Lucia's delicate face. She was the only one who could ever marry Axel, and she had to stop anyone who dared to try. Lucia slipped into the white dress and rushed to the chapel. Lucia was surrounded by the true bride's family as she walked into the building. At the end of the aisle was the groom, dressed in a sleek black suit. He was tall and straight, and his broad shoulders gave Lucia a strange sense of security. Guests lined the aisles, and they all turned to look at her as the organ played a wedding processional, and she began her long walk toward her destiny. Those who came to the ceremony were either rich or well-connected. This was the most exclusive event of the year. Anyone who was anyone was invited to attend. Lucia's face was covered by a hazy white veil, so no one could see her true face. So long as she didn't speak, there wouldn't be a problem. The only thing that made her nervous was the fact that she was about to become Axel's bride. Every step closer to him made her palms sweat. When Lucia finally reached her new groom, her heart leapt in her chest. She had made it! The groom slowly turned to face her, and Lucia shyly raised her face to meet his gaze, but her expression immediately froze. His deep features bore a noble and handsome air, but his vast black eyes were bottomless, and he exuded a dominating aura. He was like a dormant wild beast, inspiring fear and trepidation in his prey. "You're not," Lucia began, but she couldn't finish her sentence. Cole, who was hiding outside the walls and peeping through an open window, fell to the ground in shock. He had seen the groom's face, but it was not the right groom. Lucia's brain slowly caught up with what, or rather who, she was seeing. Dalen Patrick. How could it be Dalen? He's Axel's older brother. Lucia frantically turned her head to search for Axel, only to find that he was sitting in the audience, grinning at her. She frowned. "I didn't know you were so eager to become my wife, but I'll give you this one chance." Dalen's deep, magnetic voice carried a hint of teasing. This isn't right. It's supposed to be Axel getting married today, Lucia whispered. She was completely shocked. Episode 2, The False Bride. No, today is my wedding. The corners of Dalen's lips turned up in an amused grin, and there was a playful light in his eyes. I thought it was Axel's wedding. Lucia could no longer remain calm. She looked around for a way to get out of this mess before things got even worse. Besides, she knew how dangerous it was to mess with Dalen. This was the true ruler of the Patrick family, and rumor had it he was easily offended and dangerously vengeful. But Lucia knew that it wasn't a rumor. It was true. Dalen stepped closer to her. With a cold gaze, he said, "Well, since you're here, there's no reason for you to leave." What do you mean? Lucia kept looking for a way to escape, but all the exits were so far away, and Dalen was standing so close. "I heard about what you did to the woman who was supposed to be standing here. Why not follow through with your plan?" The dark and knowing smile in Dalen's eyes made Lucia's hair stand on end. No, I really made a mistake. I thought that she was marrying Axel. I hid her in the closet and she's probably almost awake. She's your bride, really. Lucia was afraid he wouldn't be able to see her face, so she lifted the veil covering her head. "Look, I'm not her. I'm really not supposed to be here." She didn't want to marry this terrifying man. She wanted Axel. However, Dalen's expression didn't change at all as she lifted her veil and he saw her true face for the first time. She felt a pit form in her stomach as his dark eyes narrowed dangerously. I want to go. Let me go." Lucia panicked and her voice trembled. This was not the kind of man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. "Are you sure?" Dalen smiled savagely and looked pointedly toward the door. Lucia followed Dalen's gaze and saw Cole standing in the hallway. There was a man restraining him from behind, holding a black gun at the side of Cole's head. Cole had been too focused on the wedding to notice when the man came up behind him and threatened his life. "Either you stay or he dies." Dalen's threatening voice rang in her ears. Lucia froze in place. She knew Dalen definitely had the ability. Pulling the trigger was as easy as stomping on an ant, even in front of so many guests. "Just be good. Once the wedding is done, your friend will be free to go." Blood rushed through Lucia's head with anger, but there was absolutely nothing that she could do. Cole was in danger and there was no way she could beat Dalen. At least not today. Lucia hardly registered the words of the priest as he began the ceremony. Was this really a legal marriage? Was it a joke? Why would he marry her when the bride had been swapped? If any of the guests were aware of what was happening, they didn't say a word. They were sure to know by this point she wasn't the whitehead girl that Dalen was supposed to marry, but Dalen was too dangerous of a man to question. Lucia was facing Dalen, but she turned her head to search the audience until she found Axel. She stared at him with a hidden yearning in her heart. How had she made such a horrible mistake? The priest began the vows. Lucia could hardly manage to say those two dreaded words, "I do." And then Dalen's lips were on hers, rough and demanding, not anything like how a first kiss is supposed to be. They broke apart, but Dalen's face stayed close to hers. "If you dare to resist, you'll regret it." Episode 3, No Room for Regret. Hearing those words, what was left of Lucia's hope deflated like a rubber ball. After the ceremony, Lucia was taken to a suite in a nearby hotel to wait for Dalen. She listened at the door until it was quiet and cracked it open to see if she could run away. Her way was completely blocked by guards standing outside, but she still tried to sneak past. It was futile. The guards simply dragged her back into the room. Once they closed the door, she ran over to the window, but her room was 10 floors off the ground. She would never survive. There was no way she would be able to escape. She sat on the sofa and raked her brains for any memory she had of offending Dalen. What had she done to make him hate her so much? Axel was the only member of the Patrick family she'd ever talked to. The rest of the family was too much like Dalen, completely unreachable. Lucia let her mind drift to one of her happiest moments. She was walking on the road when a car veered in her direction. She hadn't even noticed the danger until Axel pulled her out of harm's way. It was Axel who saved her, and with that rescue, her whole heart belonged to him, and she swore to marry Axel. At that point, she didn't even know that Axel was a Patrick, but even after she connected the dots, she didn't care. She was in love. As for Dalen, it was likely that everyone in Los Angeles, and probably the entire country, knew him. After saving her, Axel had invited her to the annual Patrick family banquet happening later that night, and just then she realized that she had actually seen Dalen once. He had been surrounded by people trying to be introduced to him and get close to him. She still remembered how cold, proud, and noble he had looked, his presence radiating power. Lucia couldn't understand why Dalen went through with the marriage. Yes, she was the one who got herself into this mess, but why couldn't Dalen have just told her to get lost? The door flew open, and Lucia was momentarily stunned when she saw the person who entered. She stood up and moved closer to the window. Dalen's well-ironed suit jacket was unbuttoned, and his tie hung loose around his neck. He walked in slowly and sat down in the very place she had been moments before. His presence was so intimidating, even when sitting down. Dalen leaned back into the sofa and took out his lighter and bit his lower lip in anticipation as he held the tip of a cigarette over the flame. Finally, he looked at her with a pair of piercing black eyes. He flipped the lid on his silver lighter, and the harsh sound made Lucia flinch. "Come here." His voice was deep and melodious, like the call of an envoy from hell. "I don't like the smell of smoke." Lucia refused. Dalen didn't say a word and pressed the cigarette into the ashtray beside him. Lucia was stunned. She didn't actually dislike the smell of smoke that much. It was just a good reason to refuse. But now her only excuse was gone. "Come here." Dalen repeated his command. Lucia heard the threat behind his words and slowly walked towards him. When she got close enough, Dalen reached out and grabbed her wrist, holding it in a vice-like grip. He kept pulling her closer to him until she was sitting almost on top of him on the sofa. Her muscles were taut, straining away from his touch. She could feel blood rushing to her head again. She had never been so close to such a terrifying man before. Dalen grinned at her awkward reaction. He reached out and cupped Lucia's cheek, tilting her head until she was looking into his dark eyes. Lucia was too stunned to speak as she tried to hold his gaze, trying to convince him and herself that she wasn't scared of him. "So, I heard you were trying to escape?" Lucia knew that his guards had probably reported her attempts to sneak out the door. She simply could not deny it. "Yes. Remember, you should not go back on your words." Dalen's voice was low and filled with an irrefutable aura. "Why should the marriage continue? You know full well that I am not your bride." "That doesn't matter. You are now." The surety in Dalen's imposing manner made it impossible to argue with him. Lucia was confused. There had to have been something she had done to provoke Dalen to do this to her. Episode 4. Let's just take that as a reason for now. The banquet was the only place Lucia could remember seeing Dalen, but even if she had offended him somehow, forcing her into a loveless marriage was not the way to handle the situation. "You honestly can't be using marriage to punish me. Or do you actually like me?" Lucia had crossed many lines to be with Axel. Had Dalen done the same with her? Then let's take that as a reason for now. Lucia didn't know how to respond. She just stared at him, trying to find some hint of emotion in his harsh eyes. Also, I don't care what relationship you have with Axel. Don't let me see anything that I shouldn't see. Do you understand? Lucia was stupefied by the question. Her long eyelashes blinked. Never look at a man outside your husband. Never say no to me. Never allow anything against me. Lucia stared at the shameless guy with a flushed face. However, it seemed like Dalen wasn't done yet. It felt like he had something more to say. I don't believe you. How can anyone be so evil? Lucia expressed her disagreement. I have the final say. Dalen smiled sinisterly, appearing to be extremely domineering. Lucia said angrily. After leaving the hotel room, Dalen led Lucia down to the parking garage and held open the door of a large black car. She slid inside, and they drove toward Dalen's mansion, her new home, with cars full of bodyguards following close behind them. Lucia silently sat on the leather seat, wringing her hands and chewing on her lower lip. His mind was in chaos. How could her life have changed so fast and in such an unimaginable way? Perhaps this was all a dream, and she'd wake up tomorrow in her own home, in her own bed. The car took an unexpected turn, and Lucia realized she had no clue where Dalen actually lived. When they finally pulled up a long driveway and she got out of the car, Lucia was flabbergasted. Mansion wasn't a big enough word to describe the building in front of her. It looked more like a castle. It was made of cold gray bricks that almost matched the night sky. It had to be worth millions, but Lucia didn't even dare to guess its true value. The lamps and footlights were bright and transparent, outlining the path to the front door like a diamond road to the castle. Do you like it? A low voice entered her ears. Lucia immediately bunched up the skirt of her wedding dress and flinched to the side away from him. With a depressed tone, she replied, No matter how good it is, it's not mine. You're wrong. From now on, you are the mistress of this place. Dalen had an imposing manner, but Lucia glared at him defiantly. She'd noticed his dark eyes before, but in the light of the moon, they almost shone. She searched his face, for the first time allowing herself to see how handsome he really was. Is this why countless women dreamed of being with him, even with his reputation? If any other woman had been standing there, she would have already passed out from even the idea of having a one-night stand with him, let alone being married to him. Lucia broke her gaze and followed Dalen into the castle. When she realized he was leading her to the bedroom, an uncomfortable pit began to form in her stomach. As soon as the doors were closed behind them, Dalen started casually pulling his boots off, and Lucia really started to panic. She knew what came next. What are you afraid of? Dalen asked. He'd taken off his jacket, and Lucia couldn't help but notice how well his crisp white shirt fit his chiseled body. He reached out for Lucia and pulled her close to his firm, hard chest. Lucia could feel herself shaking as Dalen started to lead her toward the bed. 3 buttons on his shirt were opened, and she could see the strong muscles underneath. She couldn't do this. Episode 5. No Need to Be Shy. Lucia swallowed hard and asked, What are you doing? Well, what do you think I'm doing? Dalen asked charmingly. Lucia was afraid that if she opened her mouth, she would regret it. Dalen pinched her chin and asked, I'm going to take a bath. Want to come? Nodding toward the bathroom, Lucia realized this was a vague invitation for her to join him. She was horrified. She wanted to shake her head, but Dalen still had a hold of her chin, so she could only open her mouth. You wash first. After what felt like forever, Dalen released her. With a sinister smile in his black eyes, he turned around and went to the bathroom. The oppressive feeling disappeared as the door shut behind him, and Lucia raised her hands to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. She wasn't sure what else she'd expected, seeing as this was technically their wedding night, but she had to find a way to get out of it. But there was no way she could escape with Dalen or his many bodyguards coming after her. Lucia snapped back to reality and spun around looking for any way to avoid what would happen after Dalen came out of that bathroom. She stared at the wall, willing it to split open and let her escape or hide. And then she got an idea. She backed up slowly, and then, after a deep breath, sprinted toward the wall. With a bang, Lucia fell to the ground and stopped moving. Dalen, who was in the middle of stripping off his clothes, heard the commotion. When he walked out of the bathroom, he saw Lucia lying motionlessly on the floor. He walked over and carefully picked her up, only to realize that she had fainted. When Lucia woke up the next morning, she found herself lying on the bed. She turned her head and saw the face of the man who shared a bed with her. She panicked and wished she'd pretended to still be asleep. Dalen stared at her with his black eyes and asked in a low voice, "Are you hurt?" "How did I get to the bed?" Lucia asked in a flustered tone. She stared at this man lying next to her. His shirt was entirely off now, and he was only wearing his boxers. She gasped and pulled the only blanket off the bed with her, wrapping it around herself tightly. Dalen didn't even seem fazed by her reaction. He just kept lying there, smiling. It was so unbearable that Lucia had to turn around, but she heard Dalen get up from the bed and walk towards her. Dalen watched as Lucia's blush crawled from her neck to her cheeks. Lucia was unquestionably shy, but Dalen still approached her without a care in the world. There was something about her he couldn't quite describe. As he got closer, he got a whiff of the perfume she'd been wearing all day. The smell of it drove him crazy. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you satisfied?" His voice was barely a sigh, and Lucia could feel his warm breath on her neck. Her body felt numb, and she couldn't bring herself to push out of his embrace. "Let me go. I don't know what you're talking about." Lucia felt her face burning. "There's no need to be shy." Dalen lowered his head and softly bit at Lucia's shoulder. "You don't do that," Lucia protested as she finally succeeded in shrugging him away. Episode 6, Don't Look Back. Even after Lucia stepped out of Dalen's grip, she could feel the ghost of his lips on her shoulder. Dalen let her go. Being that close to her, he finally realized what she smelled like. Jasmine. The smell calmed his racing mind, taming the beast inside of him. Once the adrenaline wore off, Lucia began to feel the pain in her head and side. "You hit the wall pretty hard last night," Dalen said, as he moved around the bed and toward the bathroom. "I didn't know what to do," Lucia admitted, trying to avoid saying anything that might provoke him. "You don't need to hurt yourself just to get away from me." Dalen's teeth clenched as he tried to suppress the temper rising in him. It would do no good to get angry now. Okay, whispered Lucia, not sure what more there was to say. Just as Dalen was about to enter the bathroom, Lucia thought of a plan. "I don't have any clothes to wear. Please, can I run home and get some clothes?" Once she left, she wasn't planning on coming back. "There are clothes for you in the closet," was all that Dalen said as he closed the bathroom door. Lucia pulled open the doors to the closet and stood there gaping as she took in the scene before her. The closet was as big as the living room in her house, and her house was not considered small. The left side of the closet was male clothing, and the right side female. In the frame drawer in the middle were all watches, even limited edition ones that sell for more than Lucia made in a month. Lucia was dazzled, and she truly felt the difference between her and Dalen in a totally new way. Compared to the Patrick family, the Elrod family was like a poor man in a rich world. She walked over to the ladies' area and started sifting through the racks of clothing. Whose clothes were these? Lucia thought. Were they for the woman who was supposed to be Dalen's bride? Trying not to think too hard about who the clothes were for and how they got there, Lucia picked a simple t-shirt and jeans. To her surprise, they fit her perfectly. She tiptoed out of the closet and made her way over to the big European doors. Once she was sure that there were no bodyguards posted outside, she ran without looking back. As soon as Dalen finished in the bathroom and came out to the bedroom, he knew Lucia was gone. He was disappointed, but he took his time picking his suit and was just clasping his watch when his personal assistant, Spencer, knocked on the door. "Come in," said Dalen. Spencer cracked the door open. "Mr. Patrick, it seems that Lucia has gone missing. We're guessing she has returned to her home." "Well, it just so happens that I need to run some errands in that part of town. Get the car ready." Dalen was neither anxious nor impatient. He was confident he could win her back. "Will do," Spencer said, leaving Dalen once more alone in the closet. It took Lucia longer than she expected to run home. Dalen and his bodyguards surely wouldn't be too far behind. She went straight into her room, opened the dresser drawers, and began to load clothes and supplies into her suitcase. Surely Dalen knew where she lived and was already on his way. Lucia knew her only option would be to go on the run. Hopefully, after a while, Dalen would give up or forget about her, and she would be free. "Lucia, what are you doing?" The question came from a high, small voice at the doorway to Lucia's room. Lucia bowed her head and straightened her clothes. She didn't need to turn around to know that it was her sister, Macy. She had always been the curious type and loved to look for trouble and gossip. "Did you hear me?" asked Macy, moving into the room. "What's going on? Where have you been and why are you packing your suitcase? Are you leaving?" Lucia could hardly stand the barrage of questions. "I'm going on a trip," Lucia said. She didn't want to argue with Macy. "A trip?" Macy echoed, doubt laced in her voice. Then she noticed Lucia's pink diamond ring the size of a pigeon egg on her ring finger. Her eyes went wide and she stepped forward and grabbed Lucia's hands. "Where in the world did you get this from? Did you steal it? Is that why you're going on the run?" Anger flashed across Lucia's face. She yanked her hand out of Macy's grip. "Don't be ridiculous," Lucia said, looking down at the ring with loathing. She should have left it at Dalen's house, but something inside of her couldn't bear to part with something so beautiful. She took a deep breath and sighed. It was a gift. Episode 7, Why Did We Stop? "Yeah, right, Lucia. There's no way you got that as a gift. You don't know anyone who could ever afford something like that. It's probably fake. Give it to me. Let me look at it closer." "No, just leave me alone and get out of my way." Lucia closed the suitcase, zipped it up, and stood to leave. But Macy grabbed her wrist as she walked past, fumbling at Lucia's hand to try and slip the ring off her finger. "What are you doing? You're crazy!" Lucia shouted, furious with her sister's juvenile behavior. "Give me the ring!" Macy grunted, clutching tightly onto Lucia, refusing to let go. Lucia couldn't shake Macy off her. She grabbed the bedside lamp and held it above Macy's head. "Let me go or I'll smash this on your head," she threatened. "You wouldn't," Macy said, but she was eyeing the lamp nervously. "I would," Lucia replied, raising the lamp even higher. "Fine, I'll let you go." And Macy finally released Lucia from her grasp. Lucia knew she'd lost precious time she desperately needed to get far enough away to avoid Dalen. There was no one else at home, so Lucia didn't waste any more time. She ran out and toward the train station, dragging her suitcase behind her. As she ran, she thought about Macy again. Why didn't she just give Macy the ring? It's not like she had any use for it, except perhaps she could sell it and get money for her escape. Her pace quickened and she turned down the next street toward the nearest pawn shop. She burst into the shop panting and pulled the ring off her finger. "How much is this worth?" Lucia asked as she held the ring out to the owner. The man carefully plucked the ring from her hand and his eyes went wide with amazement as he realized what it was. He pulled out his magnifying glass to get a closer look, and he was filled with amazement and greed. "How much is it worth?" Lucia asked impatiently, glancing over her shoulder. "I'll give you 10,000, the owner said. "You're joking. It's got to be worth at least 5 times that amount," Lucia said in disbelief. The Patrick family was notorious for showing off. There was no way Dalen would settle for anything less than $100,000. "You see this?" the man said, pointing to the largest diamond set in the middle of the ring. "This pink diamond is obviously fake. It's way too big. It's a great fake, though. You're lucky I'm offering so much." Lucia knew that Dalen would never use a fake diamond, but she was in a hurry to leave. With an exasperated sigh, she said, "Deal," and she sold the diamond ring for $10,000. Meanwhile, Dalen's limousine drove slowly down the road, followed by the bodyguard's car. People moved out of their way, and cars pulled to the side of the road to let the foreboding procession pass by. Spencer, who was sitting in the front seat, answered a call on his phone and reported, "Mr. Patrick, it seems that your runaway bride has gone to the train station. We also got a report that she pawned the wedding ring for $10,000. "Get it back." Dalen's eyes turned dark, but he had to smile at how badly Lucia had been ripped off. "That ring is worth over $10 million, but don't pay a dime for it. I don't care how you get it back, just get it done." "Yes, sir. Understood," said Spencer. Lucia's train finally pulled out of the station, but even with it on the move, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Something still wasn't right. Looking around the carriage, she saw the passengers around her talking to their friends or scrolling on their phones. There were children begging their parents to let them play video games, and most of the parents had already given in. What a common scene for such an abnormal day. Just when Lucia started to feel like her worries were unnecessary, she saw several black off-road vehicles outside the window. The cars were moving at the same speed as the train. The worry returned, even stronger than before. Even more frightening was the fact that the train gradually slowed down until it finally came to a stop. Lucia froze. One of the train attendants was moving through the aisle, and Lucia asked, "What's going on? Why did we stop?" Before the train attendant could say anything, a voice came over the broadcast system. "Dear passengers, our train service will be suspended for just a few minutes while we sort out an error in our passenger information. We apologize for the inconvenience." Lucia looked back at the attendant with desperation in her eyes, but the attendant was listening to a voice on her walkie-talkie. She looked back down at Lucia and said with a look of pity, "Just stay here." And then she moved away. Lucia knew it had to be Dalen. Once the attendant was gone, she ran to the door of the train and pried it open. She began to run down the aisle of the next car, but something stopped her dead in her tracks. Episode 8, Never Take It Off Again. Lucia stared blankly at the bodyguards who blocked her path down the aisle. Spencer walked forward and handed over his phone. "Mrs. Patrick, a call from Mr. Patrick?" Lucia stared at the phone in front of her and accepted it after a few seconds of hesitation. Dalen's low and intimidating voice filled her head. "Taking a trip?" "Dalen, I don't want to be married to you. I made a mistake. I'm sure there are countless women who would love to marry you. Why can't you marry someone else?" "I want to see you within 5 minutes or I'll destroy everything you care about. Don't underestimate me." Lucia was speechless. She couldn't understand how Dalen could be so ruthless, and there was no one who was brave enough to stand up to him. He was too powerful. "Okay, I'm coming." After Lucia answered, she heard Dalen's low laugh. Lucia's expression soured. He won, but he didn't have to gloat. She had no choice but to obediently follow Dalen's bodyguards. They drove along the line back to the train station, and there was Dalen's car waiting. Lucia was escorted to it like a convict. All that was missing was the handcuffs. The interior of the car was spacious, so Lucia sat in the seat farthest away from Dalen. As soon as she sat down, the car's engine roared to life, and they started driving away from the train station, away from her only hope of freedom. Soft tears fell down her cheeks as she tried to hold in her sobs. She couldn't show weakness and cry now. She had to be strong. In order to escape, you even sold your wedding ring. Even after everything I've offered you. Dalen crossed his long legs, leaning back into the seat. His deep eyes seemed to stare straight into Lucia's soul. I don't have much money on me, but I can pay you back. Just give me some time, Lucia stammered. That ring is worth $10 million. You sold it for $10,000. You were really ripped off. What? Lucia gasped. 10 million? You must be joking, right? Dalen's calm expression didn't change. He was completely serious. Lucky for you, we managed to convince the pawn shop owner to give it back to us, free of charge. He reached out and grabbed Lucia's left hand, sliding the ring back onto her finger. Lucia frowned at it. That man said it was only worth $10,000 and that the diamond was fake. The next time I see him, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. Dalen looked at her amused. I didn't think you had it in you to say something like that. Lucia stared back at him, confused. Please, just tell me, how did I offend you? Why do you insist on keeping up this scam of a marriage? Just tell me so I can apologize to you. I don't know, maybe I could make up for it somehow? Dalen sighed. Why do you keep thinking that you offended me? I'm not trying to punish you. I'm just genuinely intrigued. You're not like any other woman I've ever met. Well, you have a very strange way of showing your affection, Lucia thought. I hate being disappointed. So, I'm asking you, please don't run. I get angry, and I don't want to have to do something you'll regret. Lucia's face was burning. How could he say such shameless words? As she was lost in her thoughts, she started twirling the extraordinary ring round and round her finger. Her hands turned cold. The ring didn't have anything to do with happiness. It felt more like handcuffs. Don't take it off again, Dalen said, watching her fiddle with it. There would be no point in fighting against Dalen. The result wouldn't be worth it. Sorrow settled on Lucia's soul like a heavy layer of winter snow. I agree to your request, but I also have something to ask, Lucia said. Speak. We're married, but I don't want my family to know. Lucia turned her head to look out the window so Dalen couldn't see the tears leaving tracks down her face. Why is that? Lucia frowned. You know why. Episode 9. Troubling and Difficult Situations. Come on, tell me, Dalen said. I'd rather hear it from you. It's nothing. Just, I don't have a good relationship with my family. I don't want to tell them. Fine. It's not like I really care anyway, Dalen responded. The windows were tinted so much that it was hard to see outside. Lucia lowered her gaze and stared at her hands folded in her lap. After her mother passed away, her father, Sheldon Elrod, had married Macy's mother, Barbara Holland. They wanted a seamless merging of the two families, but that was an optimistic hope. Lucia had loved her father, and she thought he would be there for her no matter what. But after a while, it seemed like he was siding with Barbara and Macy more and more. He gave Macy preferential treatment and let her do things he never would have allowed Lucia to do. Lucia had tried to remain close to her father, but she finally realized it was futile. So she grew to hate her father, and confiding in him about her marriage was the last thing she wanted to do. Dalen's gaze was fixed on Lucia. He could tell she was deep in thought, but she was acting so distant. He didn't dare ask what was on her mind. When Lucia looked up, the cold feeling in her body was gone. Only Dalen's deep, warm eyes were left. Was it her imagination, or did his gaze actually seem kind? I can help you, Dalen whispered. No need. It's just a family conflict. I can solve it myself. I don't need or want your help, Lucia said, and Dalen's eyes flashed back to their typical coldness. There was an awkward silence that stretched on forever, until finally Lucia said, Oh crap, I forgot today is Monday. My history lecture starts soon. Can you drop me off at the university? No rush. Let's return to the castle first. I just got the message that lunch is almost ready, Dalen said. Lunch in the Patrick mansion was a grand affair. Whether it was food or drink, everything was very expensive. Even the utensils were all pure silver. But Lucia hardly noticed. All she wanted was her freedom. They sat on opposite ends of the long table, waiting as the kitchen staff set up the feast. Two men dressed in uniforms came up to Lucia. The taller one said, Ma'am, I'm Edward, the manager of the house. This is John, my assistant. If you have any requests for food or clothing, you can tell us directly and we'll take care of everything. Anything to make your stay here more comfortable. Lucia looked at Edward and John and shook her head. No need to make a fuss. I'll eat whatever you guys prepare. And please, just call me Lucia. Edward frowned and looked like he was about to protest. You said just now that I can ask you guys for anything, right? My request isn't that big, right? Lucia asked. Edward still looked uncomfortable, but with a nod of approval from Dalen, he accepted the request and retreated back to the kitchen. I think that you like to make trouble and be difficult, Dalen said. Lucia glared. Only when I'm in troubling and difficult situations. Dalen grabbed the bowl of potatoes and shoveled some onto her plate. Eat, he said, gesturing at the table full of food sitting between them. Lucia took a deep breath through her nose, and the pleasant aromas coming from the nearby entrees made her salivate. She gave in and started piling food onto her plate. After lunch, Dalen kept his promise and had Spencer drive her to her lecture. As soon as she entered the classroom, she was pulled to the side by Cole, who had been worrying about Lucia for the past day. What exactly is going on? Did you really marry Dalen? Shh. Lucia hurried to cover Cole's mouth with her hand. Please tell me you didn't tell anyone else. Episode 10. I'm happy for you. Of course I haven't told anyone. I haven't even heard the whole story yet from you. I'm so confused. Everything online was saying that it was Axel who was getting married. That couldn't have been Dalen, right? Was I seeing wrong? This is unbelievable. Do you have any idea how bad it would be if you're married to Dalen? Cole was unable to describe how he felt. After a whole day and night, he still hadn't recovered from the shock. Don't ask me. I'm as confused as you are. Who knows what possessed Dalen to go through with the marriage after realizing it was me? I wish I could get away from him, Lucia said. Did you guys even know each other before? Or maybe he just saw your face and thought you were hot. Cole was teasing her, but she wasn't in the mood. Yeah, right. He's not like that. I doubt he's ever even been in love. It makes me nervous, though, not knowing if he's planning something. But when I find out, I'm going to blackmail him into divorce. Lucia clenched her fist and thought of how good it would feel to punch Dalen right in his perfectly sculpted jaw. Cole looked toward her hands when she clenched them and spotted the ring. Whoa, is this the ring? That thing's huge. It must have cost an insane amount of money. Cole held Lucia's finger and stared at it as if he were worshipping it. Of course it's valuable, but keep your voice down, Lucia whispered. It cost over $10 million. This ring could pay my student debt 100 times over. Lucia retracted her hand, but Cole still couldn't take his eyes off the ring. Can you stop gaping like an idiot? If you like it so much, you should have been the one to marry him. Also, if anyone asks, tell them that I bought it at one of those, knockoff markets. You really aren't seeing the bright side of all this, Cole sighed. Hey, you, better than anyone, should know that the person I like is the gentle and refined Axel, and not that demon Dalen, Lucia said angrily. You do realize Axel is technically your brother-in-law now, yeah? Don't let your imagination run wild. I've heard Dalen gets pretty jealous, Cole reminded her. How could Lucia not have realized this? She stomped her feet in anger. This is all just so annoying. In the middle of the most boring history lecture she'd ever heard, Lucia's cell phone started to vibrate. She silenced the call and a notification popped up that she'd missed a call from her dad. She ignored it and didn't bother calling him back when the lecture finished. Besides, she wouldn't have had time because as soon as she left the lecture hall, she saw Spencer waiting to escort her back to the mansion. Just as she entered the mansion, Lucia's footsteps paused as she passed by the lounge. It was Axel. He was standing in front of the glass window with a cup in his hand, gazing out at the incredible view of the city. His eyes in the reflection of the glass were gentle and calm. She cleared her throat and he finally turned around. When he looked at her, his eyes were like the warmth of the winter sun, shining for the first time on a blanket of snow. He was her Prince Charming, and it broke her heart to see him here. You're back? Lucia stepped forward and asked, On the day of the wedding, did you do it on purpose? What do you mean? I'm happy for you, Axel said with a confused look. Although I did think for a while there, well, never mind. You're married, and it doesn't matter anymore. Lucia desperately wanted Axel to continue, but she couldn't ask him to continue without giving away the fact that her marriage to Dalen was a mistake. Axel had no idea what was going on. He didn't know that Dalen had forced her into a marriage that she wanted with Axel. No one realized that she was the wrong bride. Her only consolation was that Axel didn't plot against her with Dalen. That's not it. Let me tell you. Lucia wanted to explain, but her words stopped abruptly, stuck in her throat, and she swallowed. Episode 11, Let's Wait. Lucia couldn't tell Axel the truth. She can't just say, You know, the only reason I'm married to your brother right now is because I thought it was you who was getting married. I was there for you, but instead I got Dalen. Wasn't that just telling Axel the truth that she liked him? That she had always been secretly in love? While she was lost in thought, trying to figure out what to say next, she heard another voice, this one low and cold. Why don't you tell him more? Lucia's body stiffened. She turned around and saw Dalen, who had suddenly appeared behind her. Did he hear what she said to Axel just now? Why don't you head back to our room, babe? It's been a long day. Although it was phrased like a suggestion, Lucia knew it was a command. Dalen walked closer to them, his tall stature towering over Lucia. Lucia glanced over at Axel one more time and turned to walk toward the bedroom. What's the matter? Dalen asked his brother once Lucia was gone. Axel couldn't hide the worry on his face. I talked to Victoria. You know, she's devastated you married someone else, right? It was a huge blow to her. You should talk to her, figure things out. The best thing to do now is to pretend that she doesn't exist. I don't have the patience to deal with another emotional woman. One is more than enough. Lucia paced around the room she now shared with Dalen. She was too wound up to think of sitting. She just replayed her and Axel's conversation over and over in her mind, wondering if there was anything she could have done better to get out of this situation. She wondered if she should just lock the door, but the door didn't even have a lock. There was no way she'd share a bed with Dalen. She needed to protect herself, didn't she? She had to leave this place. The door opened and Dalen walked in. Lucia stood there without moving, watching him as he approached her. Before she could move to the side, she was stuck between Dalen and the wall. Lucia's mind went blank as she stretched out her hand to push him away. However, when her hands landed on Dalen's chest, she felt his muscles, tough, sturdy, and burning hot. No matter how much strength she used, he didn't move back. "What are you doing?" he asked, looking down at her hands with amusement. Lucia's jaw was clenched in frustration as she lifted her head to meet the pair of deep black eyes. "Did you forget what I said? You shouldn't look at a man other than your husband." "Well, that's just impossibly ridiculous. Men make up half the population, and I'm just looking at them the same way I normally do," Lucia retorted. "Is that so?" Dalen laughed coldly. She saw his eyes dilating and her pulse quickened. Dalen was moving closer to her, and to Lucia's surprise, she let him. It was almost like being in a trance. He came even closer and started bending his face to hers. Just then, she snapped out of it and ducked her head. "Stop, please. I can't do this." She was shaking from fear, but also from something else. Could it have been anticipation? Dalen brought his forehead down to rest on the top of her head. "Why do you have to make this so difficult? I can tell you want it as much as I do." Lucia immediately stopped her breathing. She didn't want it. Did she? Dalen kissed the top of her head and took a deep breath of her jasmine perfume. "Please, can't we wait? I want to finish school and get my degree, and I can't have anything getting in my way. Not after everything I've worked so hard for. Please, let's wait." Episode 12. Congratulations on your graduation. Dalen raised his head. His black eyes were consuming, as if it could swallow her whole. Lucia only felt his fingers against the back of her neck, hot and pressing. "I only have 1 year left. That's not too long to wait, right?" Lucia let out a nervous laugh. Dalen stared at her, considering her offer. Suddenly, he let her go and said in a low voice, "Sure." He stepped back and Lucia's legs almost gave out from under her. She hadn't realized how much he'd been supporting her. Even after her taut nerves had relaxed, she felt sore all over. She took a few deep breaths and then went to sit on the sofa. She was surprised that Dalen had agreed to her request so easily. Lucia decided to try and take advantage of the opportunity and asked, "I want to sleep alone in a different room, okay? Just wait until I graduate from college. Then I'll move in with you." She knew it was a long shot, but she was hoping that she could get out of the situation long before that day came. "Sure," said Dalen, once again surprising Lucia. Dalen called John into the room and instructed him to prepare the bedroom next to his for Lucia. Although she wasn't quite satisfied with how close the room would still be to his, she was glad to not have to worry about sharing a bed with this man. Her new room was large, and the bathroom had a glorious shower that she stayed in for way too long. When she finally stepped out of the shower, her phone started to ring again. The caller ID showed that it was her dad. Lucia hesitated before answering. Before she could open her mouth to say hello, the voice on the other side started questioning her. "You seriously threatened to hurt Macy?" "She stole my things!" Lucia didn't think she was wrong, and she was frustrated that a phone call with her dad began with her immediately having to defend herself. "So you tried to beat her? I can't believe you can't see how serious this is. What if something had happened?" She could hear her dad's voice fill with anger. "Was Macy hurt? No. Why are you always taking her side on these things without even asking for my side of the story?" "You..." But Lucia wasn't interested in hearing the end of his sentence. She ended the call and threw both herself and her phone onto the bed. Why had this phone call made her so upset? She should be used to it. She had been trying to get used to it. Lucia and Macy had never been close, even when they were young. In college, Macy went to prep school while Lucia went to a public school. Barbara said that the prep school had only accepted Macy, and her dad believed it, even though Lucia had done well in school her whole life. Lucia saw straight through Barbara. This was Barbara's plan to spend all the money she had saved on her daughter. Eventually, Lucia's racing and raging mind finally calmed, and she was able to fall asleep. The next day, in the middle of a literature lecture, Lucia got an email requesting that she go to the dean's office as soon as possible. When she walked into the office, the dean looked at her suspiciously and held out an envelope. "Here's your diploma." Lucia opened her mouth in shock. "Wait, no, I still have a year before I graduate." "Well, you must have someone looking out for you because we've got strict instructions to issue this diploma as soon as possible. So congratulations," the dean said with a chuckle. But Lucia could not laugh along. She couldn't even crack a smile. This had to be because of Dalen and the deal they'd made yesterday. He'd actually used his influence to make her graduate early. Only Dalen could have made this happen. "Thanks, but I want to complete my coursework. I'm sure you understand." And with that, she turned and left the office and headed straight back to Dalen's house. Lucia had just entered the front door when she heard a woman crying softly. She followed the sound down the hallway and toward Dalen's study. A woman? Did Dalen actually have the audacity to bring another woman into the house when she wasn't allowed to even think about other men? But why was this mysterious woman crying? Lucia peeked in through the door to Dalen's study and saw Dalen's large sculpted back. Opposite him stood a weak and delicate woman, crying and clutching the front of his shirt. Sure enough, Lucia thought, he had brought a woman back. Episode 13, The Deal. Lucia felt her blood boil. How could Dalen be this obvious? Even if this marriage was basically a sham, Lucia felt embarrassed and mad. "I've always been patient and turned a blind eye to your affairs because I knew I was the only one you truly loved. But how could you go through with the marriage when you knew it wasn't me? Dalen, my heart is breaking. Why are you doing this to me? There must be a reason behind marrying a girl you don't like at all, right?" Victoria wiped her eyes from time to time, her voice shaking. "What's done is done. I'm married now, and you should go. I'll call a driver to take you home." Dalen's face was expressionless. Victoria's soft crying burst into sobs, and she ran toward the door of the study. Lucia quickly backed up and ran back into the main hall, pretending that she had just returned. When Victoria walked into the main hall and saw Lucia, her expressions hardened. She glared at Lucia as she walked out. Lucia pitied her. The girl didn't recognize her, didn't know it was her who had robbed her husband and her happiness. When Dalen walked out, Lucia immediately stepped forward. She hadn't forgotten the reason why she came back so angry. "Dalen, can you please explain how I just graduated without finishing my last year of school?" The corner of Dalen's mouth raised. "You asked for us to wait until you graduated. Well, congratulations on your graduation." His tone was light, but his eyes were dangerous. Lucia took a step back. "No way. I'm talking about a real graduation, one that I've earned. If you're really so eager, why don't you go find another woman? The one who left was pretty." "Unfortunately, none of the other women are able to arouse my interest," Dalen said. Lucia's face was red and hot. How could he say stuff like that? "No, even if we didn't wait the whole year until I graduated from college, it wouldn't be now. I need to be mentally prepared." Lucia resorted to the strategy of delaying the war. "How long?" Dalen's voice was heavy. 10 months. "Too long," Dalen said, shaking his head. 1 month. 6 months. Lucia knew she'd need time to figure out a way to get away from Dalen once and for all. He'd already proved that he could stop a train and con a university. This was going to be more difficult than Lucia thought. 2 months, Dalen countered. 5 months. 3 months. 4 months, Lucia said, speaking quickly, hardly waiting for him to make a counteroffer before trying a new one. 5 months, said Dalen. 3 months, said Lucia. Deal. Lucia's voice died in her throat as she realized her mistake. She was tricked. Dalen looked at her with interest. There was a conspiracy in his black eyes. As she walked, Dalen turned and walked away. She was once again struck by how different the worlds they lived in were. This man was powerful, smart, and insanely wealthy. Compared to him, Lucia was average in every way. She had to find a way to win against him. Well, at least she had 3 months to figure it out. Lucia lay awake in bed that night, trying to think of something, anything, when an idea came into her head. She bounced up from the bed, tiptoed out of the room, and went to find John. Episode 14. Should we go? Lucia found John with little trouble. He was in his office instructing some of the staff on the menu for tomorrow. She stepped into the room as the staff left, and he looked up at her with surprise and concern. Is something wrong, Mrs. Patrick? No, nothing's wrong. I just have something to ask you. And please don't tell Dalen, I asked. Who is that woman who came to the house today? Lucia asked. Are you referring to Miss Victoria? She's a close family friend to the Patricks. Her family and theirs have been in business together for years, John said. I believe she's staying with Dalen's parents at the moment while she learns more about running her family's business. The upper-class families were complicated, everyone trying to marry each other to increase their wealth even more. All her family did was own a small business, and sometimes even that was complicated. She couldn't imagine how convoluted things got when so much money was on the line. And she likes Dalen, doesn't she? Lucia asked with a hint of gossip in her voice. My apologies, Mrs. Patrick. I'm afraid we cannot interfere in Mr. Patrick's private matters. John lowered his head slightly. A low, lazy voice interrupted. Next time you have a question, just ask me yourself. Lucia was shocked. She turned around and saw Dalen, who had appeared in the doorway. His tall figure was leaning lazily against the door as he looked at her with his dark eyes. John bowed toward Dalen and quickly left the room, leaving Lucia alone. Oh, it's nothing. I don't want to know anything. I'm going to sleep. Good night. Lucia ran off as soon as she finished her sentence. Lucia was now married to a man that women sought after, but she wasn't happy at all. In her class the next day, she could hardly focus. She folded over, resting her head on her arms to try and block out the harsh overhead lights. She had always loved school, but ever since she married Dalen and moved to his luxurious mansion, she found that she had higher expectations. I'm turning into a princess, she thought, disappointed in herself at how quickly she'd gotten used to a life of luxury. Dalen gave her the best food and clothing, the kind of expensive life that others couldn't even imagine. Lucia, why are you so tired today, huh? Get up. Hey! Cole sat down beside her seat. Hey, what? Lucia wasn't very interested. I heard some people were planning to hit up a bar tonight. Should we go? Lucia used to go to the bar with her classmates all the time. They all ate and danced and had a good time. Dalen can't seriously stop you from going, right? Cole asked as Lucia's expression grew worried. Cole's question sparked a resolve in Lucia. No, Dalen couldn't have such strict control over her life. She suddenly sat up straight and slapped the table. You're right. Why wouldn't I be able to go? Lucia called the house and said that she had a party with her classmates tonight and would be back later. After that, she went to the bar with her classmates. Episode 15. Close Encounter. Most of her friends had already hit the dance floor, but Lucia was still eating and drinking from the snacks on the table. As Lucia stared at the twisting figures on the dance floor, a nice-looking middle-aged man sat down opposite her. I've had my eyes on you ever since you came in. Do you have any idea how beautiful you are? Lucia continued to chew the crackers she'd just put in her mouth as she looked coldly at the man's friendly face. She placed her left hand on the table, letting her diamond ring catch the light. Hopefully, this would be an obvious enough signal to the man that she wasn't interested. Oh, sorry. he said awkwardly as he got up to leave. Cole watched the scene from afar and returned to his seat near Lucia. Are you really just going to sit here eating until you're full and go home? Cole asked. Or what? Lucia felt aggrieved. People who come here usually just take off their wedding rings and hide them in their pockets. Why don't you let yourself have a bit of fun? It's not like you even wanted to be married to Dalen anyways. Didn't you see that guy was almost as old as my dad? Lucia argued. Fine, you want a handsome guy, but in that case, you should just stop moping around about being married. I can guarantee you that you won't be able to find a man more handsome than Dalen. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I drank too much. I need to go to the washroom. Lucia stood up and left her seat, her footsteps a little weak. She almost tipped over as Cole reached out to steady her. Do you want me to accompany you? He asked, concern covering his face. No need, said Lucia once she regained her balance. In the washroom, Lucia stared at her face in the mirror. It was as red as a ripe, alluring apple, probably from how much alcohol she'd had. She thought about Dalen and had to admit that his face was carved like a god turned into a ghost. It was sharp and angled, with a pair of wide eyes that were full of depth. No matter if it was the side of his face or the front of it, there was not a single flaw to be found. Too bad his personality ruined everything. Lucia came out of the bathroom after washing her hands, but her way was blocked. At first, Lucia thought there were just some women wanting to get past her into the bathroom, but as she raised her head to apologize, she saw two men smiling down at her maliciously. They clearly had ill intentions. Excuse me, she said. Can you let me through? Hey, baby, what's the rush? Are you all alone in there? Do you need a bit of company? Let me pass. Lucia frowned and stepped back in disgust as the two men approached. Oh, come on, baby, relax. Let's have some fun. The man stared at Lucia's chest with a wretched expression. She had nowhere to run, so she pulled her fist back and punched one man in the face. Lucia looked down at her hand in a daze. She couldn't believe she'd actually been brave enough to do that. Ah! Now you're just asking for it, the man said as he clutched his nose and reached out to grab Lucia. Lucia froze in place, watching him come closer, unsure of what to do. However, his hand stopped just inches away from her. She saw an arm appear and wrap around the man's neck in a painful chokehold, making his entire face contort with pain. Lucia raised her head and saw Dalen. His eyes were cold and ruthless. He dragged the man to the ground and threw a punch that knocked him out. The other man just watched, terrified as he recognized Dalen. The blood drained from his face. How dare you touch my woman? Episode 16. You said 3 months. Dalen's voice was low and guttural, sending shivers up Lucia's spine. We didn't know she was your woman, Mr. Patrick. Please forgive us. We won't dare to do it again. Dalen looked like he was considering his apology, but in a flash he pulled his hand back and punched the man, sending him to the floor with his companion, who was just waking up. Get out of here, Dalen commanded, and take him with you. The man crawled to his feet and dragged his friend out of the bathroom as quickly as possible, eager to get far away from Dalen. Lucia stood there watching, shocked by Dalen's ruthlessness. To have heard about his temper was one thing, but what she really saw was completely different. Lucia looked at Dalen, whose face was in shadows, but his eyes were flashing. She turned around, hoping he would leave her to collect herself alone in the bathroom. Lucia still didn't know much about Dalen. She only knew that he forced her to marry him. She didn't know if he'd do something to her in a fit of rage. She heard Dalen approach her, step by step, and crossed her arms in front of her chest. Please, just let me explain. What happened it wasn't my fault. They were... But she couldn't bring herself to say it. Dalen was close now, his chest just millimeters away from her back. She could feel his height behind her. Did they hurt you? No. Lucia straightened her back and fought the urge to lean into his arms. She felt so safe now that he was here. Dalen put his hand on Lucia's arm, turning her to face him. He grabbed her and led her toward an empty room. He opened the nearest door, but there was already a couple there, embracing and kissing passionately. They broke apart when they realized Dalen wasn't going to shut the door and leave them in peace. Lucia lowered her head, embarrassed. "Come on, Dalen, let's get out of here." She was worried about what kind of plans he had for her in the room. "Get out," Dalen said coldly, staring them down. The two of them quickly decided it would be easiest to just do what Dalen said and hurried out. Dalen pulled Lucia into the room and shut the door behind him. The mood shifted and blood rushed to Lucia's face. He reached for her hands and pulled her over to a chair. After she was seated, he crouched on the floor in front of her. "What did that man do to you?" Dalen asked deeply. Lucia tried her best to cover the panic on her face. "Nothing, really. I told you, it's fine. I'm fine." "Are you disappointed?" "Of course not," Lucia immediately retorted. Did he think she wanted to be in that kind of a situation? Didn't he see her punch that guy in the face? Good, because then I would be disappointed. Dalen was leaning in, closer and closer. His face was so close to hers, but he didn't close the gap between their mouths, and neither did she. His hands moved to her waist and up, reaching for the buttons on her blouse. He undid the first and then the second, never breaking eye contact with Lucia. When he started on the third button, though, Lucia panicked. She wrapped her hands around Dalen's and guided them back to his sides. "Dalen," she said breathlessly, "you said 3 months." Dalen hesitated for a moment. His pupils were large, and she could see him fighting with himself. Then he stepped back. Lucia heaved a sigh of relief, but when she tried to stand, she realized her dress was caught on the chair. She tried undoing it on her own, but eventually swallowed her pride and turned to Dalen for help. Episode 17. Are You Okay? Lucia could feel the anticipation building in Dalen before he turned around. His breathing became ragged, and she couldn't help but notice he was so beautiful. Lucia was so embarrassed that she wanted to faint. He walked over and knelt by the chair, reaching around to try and find where her dress was caught. But every once in a while, his hand would roam, ever so slightly. "Hey, Dalen, mind your hands, yeah?" Dalen tried to chuckle, but it came out sounding more like a moan. He knew he had to get a grip, that he had made a promise to wait, but in this moment, his patience was so fragile, a single breath could shatter it. You said you'd wait 3 months, and it's only been a few days. You can't go back on your word." Lucia's face flushed red. She didn't know if she was scared or if this man, who she had sworn to despise, was actually exciting her. He was so close she could smell his clean scent. But she couldn't imagine herself being touched like that by Dalen while she was stuck here. Even if they did have any kind of real relationship, that scene was too cringy. "I can tell you're aroused," Dalen whispered, hope creeping into his voice. "No, I'm not," Lucia protested. She'd gone through so much in the space of so little time. All she wanted was to go to the bathroom in peace. Tears gathered in Lucia's eyes, threatening to fall at any moment. Dalen looked up, ready to argue, but saw the tears streaking down Lucia's face. "I'm sorry I didn't get there sooner." Dalen's voice was rough and hoarse. He finally succeeded in finding where the dress was stuck and setting Lucia free. She stood, and to her surprise, Dalen hugged her. At first, she tensed, waiting to see what boundaries he would try to push next. But as she realized he was genuinely trying to comfort her, she melted into the embrace and let herself cry. Outside of the bathroom, Dalen's bodyguards stood in 2 straight lines, cracking jokes about what they assumed was going on behind the closed door. But they couldn't have been further from the truth. About 20 minutes later, Lucia, who was now dry-eyed and put together, came out of the room. Dalen followed behind a while later. Cole had almost given up searching for Lucia, assuming she must have gone home when he spotted her coming from the hall. "Where in the world have you been? Are you hurt?" He searched her face for an answer, but before he received a reply, he saw Dalen walk out from behind Lucia. He was at least 4 inches taller than Cole and most of the other men in the bar. Cole couldn't help but retreat a few steps back. Dalen whisked Lucia away before she had the chance to say goodbye. The next day, when Lucia went to school, she sat alone eating her lunch in the dining hall. She absent-mindedly twisted her ring around her finger. She used to bite her nails out of habit, but twisting her ring had now effectively replaced that, and with every twist she thought of Dalen. Even now, after a good night's sleep, there was still a trace of discomfort when she thought about everything that happened the night before. The 2 men coming after her, Dalen stopping them, the couple in the room, Dalen coming closer to her. The scorching heat that rose within her was almost hot enough to burn her. 3 months. How could they last 3 months when they hardly made it through 3 days? "What happened to you last night?" Cole asked as he sat down on the chair beside her. "I'm sorry. Dalen dragged you away. He's such a killjoy." "Did you come here to laugh at me?" Lucia asked weakly. He laughed, thinking she was making a joke. "No, I'm your best friend. How could I laugh at you? But seriously, Lucia, are you okay?" Cole asked, finally noticing there were tears running down Lucia's cheeks. Episode 18, The Anniversary Party. "Don't worry about me. I'm fine." "Okay, well, whatever happens, you can always talk to me, right?" Cole said. Lucia gave him a grateful nod and then felt her phone start to vibrate. She took it out to check who was calling. Cole caught a glimpse of her screen and saw it was her dad. "You're not going to answer?" he asked. Lucia really wanted to reject the call, but she decided to pick it up right before it went to voicemail. "Hi, Lucia. The day after tomorrow is Barbara and my marriage anniversary. Can we count on you to be there?" Lucia felt a ball of anger in her heart, but she forced her voice to be even. "I remember. Don't worry, I won't disappoint you." After hanging up, she slammed her phone onto the table. "Whoa, what's going on? You and your dad never get into fights. I get that Barbara and Macy are jerks to you, but he's your dad." Lucia rolled her eyes and said, "He wants me to attend his wedding anniversary with Barbara tomorrow." "Are you going?" "I have to. I'm pretty sure Barbara and Macy are trying to get my dad to lock me out of his will and our business. Not that I really want to take over the business when he retires, but they can't just strip me off the option. I can't afford to let family feuds get in the way of my relationship with my dad. If they think I'll go down calmly, they have another thing coming." Cole's eyes filled with mischief. "Why do I have the feeling that Barbara and Macy are in for a wild ride?" Lucia returned to Dalen's to get ready for the anniversary party. She couldn't believe she was actually going, or that she had been invited in the first place. The thought of being there made her cringe. How could she celebrate her dad's anniversary with a different woman? Lucia was well aware that the party must have been Barbara and Macy's idea. They loved hosting events where they were the center of attention. The banquet was held at night, and it took a while for Lucia to convince Dalen to lend her a car to take to the party. The banquet had already begun by the time Lucia arrived. Everything was overdone, with flowers and ribbons exploding out of every corner. At least it was consistent with Barbara's taste, thought Lucia. Most of the attendees wore formal outfits. However, Lucia wore a simple tea-length dress that used to belong to her mother. The dress fit her perfectly, hugging her curves in all the right places, but compared to all the evening dresses, she stuck out like a sore thumb. When Barbara caught sight of Lucia, the overdone smile that had been plastered on her face disappeared. Macy, who was standing beside her mom, saw Lucia's outfit and leaned in to ask, "Mom, what in the world is she wearing? Didn't she know it was supposed to be a formal event?" "Watch out!" her mom whispered back as she guided them toward Lucia. She's bound to be here to cause trouble. What a nice dress, Lucia, Macy sneered, sarcasm dripping from her voice. Thanks, Macy, replied Lucia, undeterred. It was my mother's. She wasn't much for formality. This is actually the dress she married my dad in. Barbara and Macy both gaped at her, neither sure what to say. They settled for excusing themselves and walked toward the refreshment table instead. Let me teach her a lesson, Macy said to her mom, and then stalked back to Lucia. Barbara did not stop her. Lucia was looking for her father everywhere. Isn't it a wedding anniversary party? Why is it just Barbara and Macy here? Just as she was about to ask someone, she saw Macy stomping towards her. Why on earth would you wear your mother's wedding dress? We're celebrating my mom's anniversary here. Get out, Macy ordered. What, you want me to leave? But I have as much right to be here as you. Why are you overreacting so much to a simple dress? Lucia asked innocently. Don't act like you don't know. Episode 19, The Big Man is Here. What's wrong? Can't I wear my own mother's clothes? I think it's a nice dress, said Lucia. No matter how beautiful your dress looks, your mom's dead. Deal with it, replied Macy, hatred dripping from her voice. Lucia clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. What? Does that make you mad? It's the truth, though. Your mom is dead, and you don't belong in this family anymore. I'll tell you one more time. Leave. Macy had always been jealous of Lucia, but even she could tell that she had crossed a line. Still, it would be worth it as long as it got rid of Lucia. Lucia had been subject to many of Macy's criticisms, but she'd never heard her be so incredibly ruthless. Oh, and before you leave, give me your ring, Macy said, holding out her hand expectantly. What ring? That diamond ring on your hand? Macy hadn't been able to stop thinking about the ring. She'd looked through every jewelry store in the city, but couldn't find anything that came close to Lucia's ring. She had to have it. When did my ring become yours? Lucia laughed, making Macy even more irate. Her voice became louder, drawing attention from the people standing nearby. I know you've always hated me. I really wanted to be your sister. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. But please just give me back the ring. And then she started to sob. It was a convincing performance. Maybe she should become an actress, Lucia thought. People started gathering around the two girls, trying to piece together what was happening and why Macy was crying. They all saw the beautiful pink ring on Lucia's finger. It was truly amazing. One of Macy's friends walked up behind her as she wrapped an arm around her. She stood beside Macy and said, Can't you see Macy is really upset? Come on, Lucia. Just give her back the ring. Exactly, agreed another guest. It seems like this ring is very important to Macy. Why on earth did you take it in the first place, you selfish girl? Macy saw people gathering to her side and said, Yes, the ring is very special to me. Today is my parents' wedding anniversary. Why do you have to ruin such a special day with your cruelty? This ring is not yours, Macy, and you know it. You always want things that don't belong to you. Lucia really didn't want to argue with Macy. She knew it was impossible. But what about the other guests? They had all believed Macy without any questions, making Lucia look like a thief. Lucia looked towards Barbara, but her face was pointedly turned away, pretending that she did not see what was happening. Macy was relentless, willing to abandon her pride and make a fool of herself to get what she wanted. Suddenly, a hush fell over the party, starting at the door and making its way through to the group huddling around Macy and Lucia. Then there was a commotion at the entryway, with staff hurrying to serve the newcomer. It seemed like some big shot had come. Lucia frowned. She turned around and saw Barbara pulling her father away. She wasn't sure if her dad had seen what happened, but if he did, he made no attempt to help. The disappointment on his face, though, was like a dagger to Lucia's heart. Lucia was about to give in and leave the party when she saw the man who had just arrived, standing tall and straight. She was astonished. Why is Dalen here? No one in her family knew about the marriage, and she wanted to keep it that way. He knew that, so why was he here, especially on her parents' anniversary? Everyone at the party gawked at Dalen as he walked through the party, parting the guests as he walked closer to Lucia and Macy. Episode 20, The Ring. A single word from Dalen could easily annihilate all of the second-rate rich and powerful people at the party. Dalen was the kind of person that demanded respect. When he stood, you stood. When he sat, you crouched. His appearance called everything else to lose color. When Macy saw Dalen appear before her eyes just like that, his unruly and indifferent temperament immediately attracted her attention. Her eyes widened, and Lucia could almost feel her excited energy, and she knew the perfect way to attract Dalen's attention. Macy trained her face back into sorrow and ran to her father crying, demanding he help her retrieve her stolen property from Lucia. Her father glanced at Lucia, then turned his gaze back to Macy and whispered to her, "What are you doing?" "Lucia took my diamond ring. Remember when she threatened to hit me with the lamp? It was all so she could steal it. So I tried asking her nicely to return the ring, but she won't give it back to me. And she has the audacity to wear it to a party that she knows I'll be attending, just to rub it in my face." Macy sobbed softly, wiping away her tears as she spoke. "Where did you get this ring?" Lucia's father asked Macy. But before Macy could say anything, Barbara, who had been watching from the other side of the party, walked over and answered for her. "A while ago, I was shopping and happened to see this ring in a jewelry store window display. I thought it was pretty nice, so I bought it for my beautiful daughter." Macy had never expected Lucia to like it so much since it wasn't worth any money to begin with. "Stop making a scene, Lucia. It's an anniversary party, for goodness sake. Just give her back the ring and perhaps I'll get you one of your own next time I go out." Lucia didn't say anything. She was looking at Dalen, who was watching the whole scene unfurl with amusement, waiting to see what she would do, if she would take the ring off. The more Barbara and Macy spoke, the more impossible it was to end the matter. Lucia's father was embarrassed that there was such a scene happening when one of the most important people in the city happened to show up. "Please, I beg you, let's talk about it later," he said to the fuming women. "Mr. Patrick, please follow me. I'll show you to your seat." But Dalen didn't move. A cold glint flashed across his eyes, and he said, "Don't worry about me. It sounds like this is an important family matter. Come on, let's have everything out in the open." Lucia looked over. Dalen's expression was unreadable, but his black eyes had a hint of sharpness to them. Her father was shocked, along with everyone else in the party. They were all curious to see how the situation would play itself out. Lucia's father looked at her and said, "If it's Macy's, then just give it back to her. If you like rings so much, I'll give you money to buy another one." Lucia was hurt. "So you think this ring just belongs to Macy without even asking me my side of the story?" She looked at her father in the eye defiantly. Mr. Elrod just wanted to resolve the awkward situation quickly, but he knew how stubborn Lucia could be. Dalen suddenly spoke up. "Is this how you typically handle arguments, Mr. Elrod?" His deep voice cut through the air. With everyone watching, Dalen grabbed Lucia's hand and bent down to examine the ring, his face close enough that she could feel his warm breath on her fingers. Lucia's face burned red. Her family didn't know about her and Dalen, but if he wasn't careful, they'd be able to guess soon enough. Episode 21, Rushing into the Night. Lucia glared at Dalen, trying her best to pull back her hand without being too obvious, but her efforts were useless. Dalen's grip was too strong. There are people watching. Would you please cut it out? She whispered so low that only Dalen could hear. Instead of answering her, Dalen addressed Barbara. Mrs. Elrod, where did you buy this ring from? Dalen's voice was all business. It's just some random jewelry store. Barbara smiled, hoping Dalen would drop the issue. Unfortunately, she was facing an expert. Really? Dalen's expression was unreadable. I forgot which one it was. It was all such a long time ago. In my opinion, this ring would be worth over 10 million. Could you afford it? Dalen's stern eyes suddenly shot towards Barbara. Barbara couldn't bear the pressure and retreated a few steps back, her face turning pale from fright. Cold sweat trickled down her back. What? Over 10 million? That can't be right. It looks like Mrs. Elrod doesn't know the price. Or could it be that she suspects my judgment? Said Dalen. Of course not. Barbara's face did not look good. It started to look like she might pass out. The guests around them were whispering among themselves. Barbara loved spreading gossip, but rarely was she at the center of it. How did Lucia come to possess a $10 million ring? Macy began to realize that she would be bested, and seeing how Dalen still held on to Lucia's hand, she tried a new approach. How could she have such an expensive ring? She must have stolen it. Mr. Patrick, I apologize on behalf of my sister, but you see, Lucia often steals. Macy! Her father's voice cut off Macy's sentence before she could finish. Macy didn't dare to say anything else, but she continued glaring at Lucia. Lucia looked at her father in surprise. This was the first time he had taken her side in a conflict with Macy. Why? It was probably just because he wanted the entire matter to just be over with before their reputation was irreparably damaged. Lucia finally succeeded in freeing her hand, so she turned around and ran out into the night. She didn't care what kind of chaos and rumors she left behind her. She didn't want to go to the anniversary party in the first place. She'd never missed her mother more than when she was surrounded by this family that was not really her family, her father acting so differently. Lucia walked aimlessly down the street, not stopping for a bus or a taxi. It started to rain, and the soft drops mixed with the tears on her cheeks. Lucia wasn't surprised when the black luxury car stopped beside her. The car door opened and she saw the person sitting inside, his tall form reaching over to hold the door open. Get in the car. It was in order, but she could see the concern on Dalen's face. Lucia wiped her tears and climbed in without hesitation. She was too tired to try and fight him. Dalen watched her carefully, resisting the urge to bring her close to him, to comfort her. He knew it wouldn't help, that she wouldn't want him to. Lucia sat in silence, waiting for Dalen to bring up what had just happened, to mock her and her family. Waited for him to question her about Macy's accusation or her stepmother's blatant lie. She couldn't bear to talk about it. She just wanted to sit in this silence forever. Episode 22. Remember This. Why did you run? Dalen asked in a surprisingly soft voice. Lucia's legs were curled up underneath her on the seat. If I didn't run, you'd have given away our relationship. Dalen stared at her with what almost looked like hurt in his eyes. Any other woman would love to have an intimate relationship with me. Don't compare me to other women. I'm not like them. Lucia could feel tears threatening at the corner of her eyes. You're right. Because I married you, not anyone else. He said it so quietly, Lucia could barely distinguish the words. Lucia was speechless. All she could do was stare at the man sitting across from her. His muscles were taut and tension filled the air. He leaned forward until their knees were touching, and he reached out, rubbing the material of Lucia's skirt between his fingers. So you decided to wear your mom's wedding dress to their anniversary party? There was something like pride in his voice. It always surprised Lucia, the way he could see right through her. She looked down and watched his hands hesitate, then rest on her upper thigh. What was the result? They were all much more interested in the ring, Lucia said, ignoring the question and trying to change the trajectory of the conversation. Please, I just want to take it off. I don't want to wear it anymore. No, Dalen said. The simple answer burned through Lucia. Her chest tightened with a strange mixture of anger and yearning. Dalen drove her crazy. The reason you're wearing your mother's dress is because you wanted your father to see you and think of your mother. You wanted to make him feel guilty. But did he even notice your dress? Dalen's hand was at her waist now, his thumb moving back and forth just under her ribcage. Her breath quickened, and she couldn't think clearly enough to answer him. The way he looked at her, like he wanted to tear the dress off her body. He moved in closer, shifting onto the seat beside her. He buried his face in her neck and whispered, I can teach you how to destroy her. Lucia's ears were buzzing, and she turned her face toward Dalen's. She was curious and nodded for him to continue. What you should have done is hang a picture of Barbara's ex-husband at the party. It was your father she needed to please, and all you did was agitate her. You have to take advantage of her weaknesses. Silence stretched on as they stared at each other, each of them trying to measure the other. Lucia had to admit that his idea would have been more devastating than hers. Barbara didn't really care if her father still held on to his love for his previous wife. All she cared about was her control over him. If Lucia could threaten that control, it would terrify Barbara. But Lucia knew she wasn't the kind of person who could really go through with a plan like that. Dalen was much more ruthless than her, but that's how he's kept his power for such a long time. He needed to be this way. Lucia wasn't willing to accept his intentions were good and said, You don't need to care about what happens to me or my family. She looked back out the window, breaking their gaze. Remember this, Dalen said. Lucia couldn't help but turn her attention back to Dalen's face. At your home, we're strangers, but at my home, we are husband and wife. He leaned closer to her, and for a moment she mirrored his movement, but then he leaned away and moved back to his side of the car, staring out the window like she didn't exist, like they didn't just kiss. That evening, Lucia stood in her underwear in the center of her closet. She'd changed out of her mother's dress and hung it in the wardrobe. The dress looked out of place next to all the fine clothes that had been in the closet when she'd arrived, but it was all that was left of her mother. Barbara had made sure to erase every trace of her from the house when she'd moved in. Episode 23, Facing Dalen. Lucia stayed in the closet, staring at all the dresses and clothing that had been there when she'd arrived. She wondered who it belonged to, or who it was for. The longer she stood there, the more annoyed she felt. Or was that jealousy? She wasn't sure, and that bothered her even more. When Lucia walked out of the closet, she jumped as she saw John silently waiting by her door. After recovering, she had an idea. Take out all the clothes Dalen gave me. I don't want to wear them, she said. This, Mrs. Patrick, shouldn't you ask Mr. Patrick first? If he agrees, I'd be happy to assist you. Lucia sighed. There really wasn't anything she fully controlled here. She felt like a guest here. Lucia had no choice but to find Dalen. She crossed the hall and knocked on his door, but there was no sound from inside, so she pushed the door open and entered. She didn't see anyone in the main room, so where was he? Just then, the bathroom door opened, and Dalen walked out with only a towel wrapped around his waist. He looked surprised to see her there, but the surprise quickly melted into a warm smile. He was tall and muscular, sexy and wild, skin still steaming from the heat of his bath. Lucia's face heated up, and she immediately turned around. Dalen's smile widened, and he walked toward her, approaching her from behind. When he was hovering just behind her, he bent his head down by the side of her head. They weren't touching, but the air between them was charged with electricity. His voice was low and deep like a magnet, and his breath was hot on Lucia's neck. "Why do you always insist on turning your back to me?" Lucia's body was buzzing, heat emanating from the warm spot Dalen's breath had left on her neck. She forced herself to step forward, away from him, and turn around. "I have something to talk to you about," Lucia said. Even though they were separated by a distance, his half-naked body still carried a heat wave that continuously swept towards her. Her breath was quick and uneven. "What is it?" Dalen responded, continuing to stare at her with that mischievous glint in his eyes. "Can I get rid of all those clothes from my closet? I don't want to wear them." "No." Dalen turned around, forcing Lucia to stare at the muscles that weaved around his back. "Why not?" "Because I want you to wear them." "Oh, come on. I know you're just going to give them to some other woman once you're bored of me. And I know it's a waste to throw them away. That's not what I'm asking. I just want them moved somewhere else. Besides, it's not like I don't already have my own clothes. You might as well just save those clothes for whoever comes next." Lucia became more and more anxious as she kept arguing with Dalen, but he ignored her and walked toward his closet. She followed close behind, determined to win just this one small argument. Just when she thought that he might be close to giving in, Lucia tripped on the rug and fell onto his back. She grasped around wildly, trying to find something to steady herself on, but eventually she just fell onto the floor. Luckily, there was something soft there to cushion her fall, but when she opened her eyes, she saw that the soft thing was Dalen's towel, the one that had been around his waist just moments ago. She must have pulled it with her during her fall. The air in the room grew thick, and Lucia's heartbeat thumped loudly in her chest. Lucia kept her eyes trained on the ground as she watched Dalen's feet pivot toward her. She didn't dare look up, but she couldn't stop her mind from imagining what she'd see if she did. She buried her face back into the towel and groaned. Episode 24, The Nightmarish Dream. "If you really wanted to see me naked, you just needed to ask," said Dalen, laughter edging his voice. Lucia couldn't bear to stay any longer. She kept her eyes to the floor, turned around, and crawled out of his bedroom, running back to her room like a fugitive. Lucia's face was flushed red as she closed the door behind her. She fell back against it and tried to steady her breath and her heart. How could she be so unlucky? How could she have pulled down his towel? She hadn't meant to, but she was still so embarrassed. She had been so close to looking up at him. Knock, knock, knock. Lucia jumped at the rapping on her door, terrified it was Dalen. "Who is it?" she asked. "It's me, John." Lucia's tense nerves relaxed. She opened the door to see John standing in the hall. "What is it?" "Did Mr. Patrick give instructions on how to handle those clothes?" John asked. Lucia had almost forgotten about the whole reason she'd gone into Dalen's room in the first place. "He said no," she replied with a defeated shrug. "Don't you like the style of the clothes?" John asked. Lucia thought for a moment. "If your husband gave you the clothes that he prepared for his ex-girlfriend, would you be willing to wear them?" "I am not married," John replied. "Oh, how old are you?" Lucia asked. 37. "Well, good for you. From what I've experienced so far, marriage isn't all it's cracked up to be." John didn't answer and just stood there a bit awkwardly. Lucia immediately felt embarrassed and just wished she could keep her mouth shut and both feet firmly on the ground. She thanked John and shut the door, trying to keep her thoughts straight. It wasn't as though Lucia had no experience at all with men. After all, she'd been living in college dorms for the past 3 years. There were plenty of people she knew who were in serious and not so serious relationships. People were intimate with each other all the time without thinking much about it. But Lucia had just never met anyone she'd really connected with like that. She was a bit of an old soul when it came to love and all those tingling emotions alike. She'd seen movies, and she couldn't help but think back to those steamy scenes and imagine it was her and Dalen, instead of those who had their limbs tangled together, desperately clutching at each other like they couldn't get enough. Lucia had a terrible dream that night. She dreamed that she had lost her way in the mountains, thick with trees and fog. With every step, her calves sank into the thick grass. As she walked, something wrapped itself around her ankle. Lucia looked down and froze. She saw a large python winding up her ankles, its head held high, its tongue flicking out of its mouth. The snake made its way up to her knees, then to her thighs, and then into her body. Ah, no! Lucia woke up from her nightmare with a start. She threw off the quilt to check her legs. Under the moonlight filtering in through the curtains, she saw her legs were slender and smooth. There were no big pythons. So it was just a nightmare. Lucia's body collapsed backwards, her delicate face covered in thin beads of sweat as she gasped for breath. She didn't want to fall back asleep, afraid of what she would dream of next. But she couldn't shake the feeling of the snake making its way up her body. It was soft and supple, causing her entire body to tremble. Goosebumps formed on her arms. Lucia was exhausted when she woke up in the morning. She tossed and turned the rest of the night. Looking in the mirror, she saw dark bags under her eyes. Episode 25, Just Come With Us. Lucia rubbed some lotion on her face and went down to the dining room for breakfast. She hoped that Dalen would have already eaten and left, but when she walked in, he was there waiting for her. When she saw him, Lucia's face heated up as she recalled what happened last night, and she tried her best to remain calm, as if nothing had happened. The two of them ate in silence, stealing glances at one another every once in a while, but never keeping eye contact. "You didn't sleep well last night?" Dalen asked, but it was more of a statement than a question. Lucia had finally managed to cool the heat on her face, but now it rushed back. She frowned and stared down at her plate. "No, I slept very well." Dalen stared at her for a long time, then broke his gaze and continued eating. Lucia breathed a sigh of relief, but just as she took another bite, she heard Dalen's soft voice. "If you can't wait for 3 months, you can cancel the deal." Lucia almost choked on the food in her mouth and finally made eye contact with Dalen. "I'm not impatient. 3 months is 3 months," she said quickly. "You don't have to be afraid," Dalen teased. "I'll be gentle." Not only was Lucia's face flushed with embarrassment, she was also flustered and nervous. "You can't go back on our deal." She stood up to leave before the conversation could go any further. Dalen kept staring at her, and she saw his eyes travel up and down the length of her body. "I like your outfit." Lucia looked down at what she'd picked. She hadn't noticed that they were some of the very clothes that she'd wanted removed the day before. She'd barely noticed what she grabbed in her tired days. She rushed out of the dining room and immediately went to her closet to change. Later that day at the university, Lucia leaned against her favorite tree beside a blooming flower bed and closed her eyes. She had played several games on her phone and it had finally run out of battery and turned black. "What are you doing?" A voice came, startling her from her meditation. "I've been looking for you all day," Cole said, as he sat by her side. Lucia put down her cell phone and looked at the blue sky helplessly. "You know how I've been complaining this whole time about how Dalen and I don't even like each other. Well, I think I was wrong." "What? What happened?" I can't even talk about it. I have no idea what I'm feeling right now." Lucia was disappointed in herself. Since when did she start acting like a lovesick teenager? Lucia almost screamed, "This just makes me even more determined to get a divorce." Cole chuckled dryly. After her last class, Lucia started the long walk home. Her phone was dead, so she couldn't even call John for a ride. Just as she walked out of the campus, she heard a leisurely voice calling out, "You must be Lucia, right?" Lucia turned her head and saw a girl around her age standing behind her. There were a handful of other girls standing close behind her, all of them staring at Lucia. Lucia looked them over, deciding it wasn't worth her time to engage with them. "Nope, you must be mistaking me for someone else," she said, and began walking back. "Do you think that just because you don't admit it, we don't know who you are?" The girl scoffed, glaring at Lucia. "Fine, you know who I am. Now, who are you?" "You don't need to know who we are. Just come with us." The girl motioned with her hand for Lucia to come closer. Episode 26, The Fight. "Where are we going?" Lucia asked, trying her best to keep her distance. "I'll tell you when we get there," the girl responded. "Well, I'm not coming." Lucia turned around and started walking. Her mind was racing. If the girls decided to follow her, she'd be hopelessly outnumbered. It was 1-4. Lucia heard footsteps behind her, and she began to run, but the girls caught up and grabbed Lucia's collar, yanking her back. The other girls grabbed her arms and pinned them to her side. "Where are you going? We said to follow us." The lead girl spat in Lucia's face. Not far away, a large black car sat quietly, its engine idling. Inside, Dalen was sitting with a glass of expensive red wine in his hand. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement by the edge of the campus. He turned his head to see what was going on. "Mr. Patrick, it looks like there's some students fighting over there," Spencer, who sat in the front seat, said. The girls dragged Lucia into an alley beside one of the buildings. There was no one around to help. "Let go of me! What do you want?" Lucia was sure that she didn't know these people. "Seriously? Are you that dense?" the girl said fiercely, raising her fist. "Wait!" Lucia raised her hand to stop her. The girl hesitated for a moment, just long enough for Lucia to grab a rock from nearby and throw it toward her head. The rock connected with the leader's forehead with a thud, and she clutched her head and fell to her knees in pain. Lucia saw blood start to trickle down her forehead. When the other girls saw what Lucia had done, they rushed towards her. Lucia turned on her heels and ran out of the alley at full speed. Just as she turned the corner, she ran into a wall of flesh and muscle. She tried to roll off of the man and run around him, but his arms wrapped around her waist. She struggled against him until she realized that she recognized his smell. It was Dalen. When the other girls skid around the corner, they froze, mouths open, staring at Dalen. He glared at them, and then shifted Lucia to his side and draped an arm over her shoulder. "What are you doing picking fights?" Dalen asked in a cold tone. One of the girls hesitated, then pointed an accusing finger at Lucia. "She stole someone else's boyfriend." After saying that, they looked back at the lead girl who was still holding her forehead, glaring at Lucia with all the hate she could muster. It seemed Lucia was being accused of stealing her boyfriend. Lucia was stunned. She'd never had a serious boyfriend and had certainly never stolen one. She wanted to leave, but Dalen's arm was heavy on her shoulders, keeping her in place. I didn't steal her boyfriend. I don't even know her," Lucia explained. "So you're saying that you didn't steal Josh away from me?" the girl asked again, the same glare glued on her face. Josh? Why did that name sound so familiar? Lucia thought, searching her memories. Suddenly it clicked. Wasn't he that guy who wrote her all those love letters and then ran off to another university? Episode 27, A Luxurious Villa. She stared at the girls, amazed that those few letters had caused such a large issue, while Lucia was still processing everything when Dalen's low voice interrupted her thoughts. "Do you want to stay and sort this out?" Lucia shook her head no, and she and Dalen turned their backs on the girls. After getting in the car, Lucia raised her head and looked at the campus outside the window. She didn't understand why Dalen would suddenly appear in front of her school. After their car drove away, Macy walked up to the spurned girls and looked at the leader, who had tied a cloth around her head to stem the bleeding. What a trash! But what made her even angrier was seeing Dalen come to Lucia's defense. How did they even know each other? She stewed about it for hours. Meanwhile, Dalen and Lucia's car drove steadily along the road. Lucia sneaked a peek at Dalen's face. He was staring out the window, trying to be sure his temper wouldn't flare. It took all of his energy not to lay hands on the girl who had hurt Lucia. He didn't want his residual anger to be misdirected toward Lucia. Once he was sure he was in control, he asked, "So, what happened with this guy Josh?" Dalen's tone was casual, but there was a hint of jealousy. "He was no one," Lucia muttered, embarrassed. She rubbed her arms where the girls had gripped her. She was sure they would bruise. "Is your arm bothering you? Do you want me to massage it?" Dalen leaned forward. Lucia thought of Dalen moving to her side, rubbing his hands up and down her arms, and her face turned hot. She crossed her arms tightly and said, "No, I'm fine." She decided she might as well tell Dalen the whole story, at least as a distraction. "Josh gave me, well, he wrote a few love letters and went to school to look for me once, but I wasn't interested. I didn't even read the letters. I just sent them back to him." "Why weren't you interested?" "I was interested in someone else." At that point, she was still obsessing over Axel. She didn't even look at other boys. Of course, now she could feel herself starting to act that same way about Dalen, but she didn't dare tell him that. "Someone else," Dalen repeated to himself, but he didn't ask any more questions and Lucia didn't elaborate. The oppressive atmosphere in the car settled for a while, but the tension didn't break. After stewing in the silence for a while, Lucia thought of something and asked, "Why did you come to my school? If others noticed how close you and I are, I wonder what they would think. What if they put it together and found out we were together?" "Why are you so afraid of others finding out?" Dalen asked, more accusingly than curious. "I'm still a student. Everyone would treat me differently if they found out I'd gotten married, especially if they knew I was married to—" Lucia cut herself off, but Dalen finished her thought for her. "Married to me?" Lucia didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and looked down at her hands. Dalen did not pursue the topic any further. His thin lips slightly curled up. "Let's go eat." Lucia hadn't had lunch, and her stomach practically growled at the thought of food. She was sure they'd head back to the mansion to eat, but the car didn't take the turn up to his driveway. Instead, it kept going until they pulled up to a luxurious villa with the most beautiful yard she'd ever seen. It must take dozens of people to care for all the plants that were there. This family wasn't just well off, they were extremely wealthy. "Where are we?" Lucia asked, but Dalen ignored her and climbed out of the car, holding the door open for her. The sun was setting behind the house, so Lucia had to squint up at it to get the full effect. She could see a couple waiting for them at the front door. The man was beaming and practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. The woman was elegance personified, looking down at her and Dalen with a gentle smile on her face. Episode 28, A Delicious Feast. Lucia was still wondering who these two people were when they came down the steps to meet her and Dalen. The man stepped forward. "We've been wanting to see you for a long time. Why did you wait so long to come by?" Lucia was a little shocked. Were these Dalen's parents? Is this where Axel lived? Lucia's heart was beating unusually fast. She knew that she couldn't do or say anything to Axel even if he were at home, but she still had feelings for him. She wondered if, after she was finally able to divorce Dalen, would she even be able to pursue Axel? Lucia's mind was racing as she thought about the messy relationship between the three of them. When they sat down to dinner, Dalen's parents introduced themselves as Robert and Catherine. It became obvious that Axel wasn't home, but to her surprise, Victoria was there to dine with them. She was quiet through most of the meal and kept trying to catch Dalen's eye. Lucia sneaked a glance at Dalen, who was beside her, to see if he was showing Victoria the attention she was looking for, but he never turned towards her. Lucia felt that Dalen's taste in women was really unique. Victoria was gentle and beautiful, so how could he not be interested in her? He just had to marry Lucia. Of course, Lucia wasn't belittling herself. She knew that lots of men thought she was beautiful, but she also knew that Victoria was far better suited to be a wife. Lucia's mind was busier than her mouth when she ate. She thought about the clothes in her closet at the mansion and tried to guess whether she and Victoria were the same size. Were all those clothes meant for Victoria, or were they left over from previous women? Did Dalen prefer women who were about her same height and size? Lucia saw Victoria noticing her and quickly looked away. Dalen ladled some of the soup from the middle of the table into her bowl for her. She stared blankly at it for a while and then looked up to thank him. She knew she was acting weird, but she couldn't help it. This was the most uncomfortable situation she'd been in since the wedding. She looked around the table and everyone was staring at her, each face conveying a different emotion. Dalen's father's face was unreadable. His mother wore a gentle smile, and Victoria's expression was downcast. "If you don't like the food, we can call for something else to be brought," Dalen's mom, Catherine, said with a smile. Lucia froze for a moment before realizing that she was addressing her. She hurriedly said, "No, it's very delicious. Thank you." This was the fanciest meal Lucia had ever had, and she was trying to savor every bite. After eating, Dalen and his father went to another room to discuss business, so the three women were left alone in the sitting room. Catherine was very polite. She had dessert plates brought out and spread on the table in front of them. Lucia was stuffed from eating such a scrumptious spread, but she couldn't resist how delicate and delicious the various pastries and chocolates looked. During dinner, it was Lucia who was staring down Victoria, but now it was Victoria who was studying her. When she noticed the clothes Lucia was wearing, her eyes couldn't help but show disdain. Lucia lowered her head and looked at herself. She had refused again to wear the clothes at Dalen's, so she was in her old clothes, a simple t-shirt, a pair of skinny jeans, and simple canvas shoes. If only Dalen had told her they were eating here, Lucia would have dressed better for the occasion. Lucia tried her best to shrink into the cushions and hide her feet beneath the couch. Neither of the other women were eating dessert, so Lucia just sat thinking about how delicious it all would have tasted. She had to content herself with downing cup after cup of coffee, but she soon realized that she'd made a mistake when she needed to go to the bathroom so bad she thought she might burst. Episode 29, You Can't Win This Round. Lucia finally broke the silence and asked where the bathroom was. Once she was out of sight of the other two women, she ran the rest of the way to the bathroom. As she washed her hands, the door opened. Lucia apologized and said she was just finishing up, but when she turned her head, she saw Victoria walking in. She turned to look at her reflection in the large mirror. She hadn't even bothered to put makeup on that morning, and the longer Victoria looked at her, the more self-conscious she became. "So you married Dalen, and he doesn't even bother to make sure you don't embarrass him, huh?" "I had no idea we were coming here for dinner. I would have dressed better, had I known." "It wouldn't have really mattered anyway. Nothing you can do can make you worthy to stand beside him." Victoria's eyes were filled with coldness and contempt. So that's what this is about, Lucia thought. Well, Dalen couldn't have minded that much, right? Otherwise he wouldn't have let me out of the car, Lucia said, trying to keep her voice light and innocent. "Did you want to use the washroom? I'm finished here." With that, Lucia left. When Lucia and Dalen left, his parents waved from the porch until they were out of sight. Dalen didn't say anything to her, so Lucia just sat and looked at the city out the window. She glanced at Dalen, who was somehow even more intimidating when he was sitting quietly. He was dressed in well-ironed black suit that was probably worth more than what most people made in a month. The cufflinks were inlaid with black diamonds. With Dalen's wealth and power, what he was wearing was probably just a sliver of his wealth. On the other hand, Lucia's entire outfit was probably only worth a few dollars. They truly came from different worlds, and it was clear that someone like her didn't belong in his life, a fact she kept reminding herself of every now and then. "Why didn't you tell me we were eating with your parents? I could have worn something better," Lucia said. Dalen's gaze turned toward her. "Like what? You told me you wouldn't wear any of the clothes I gave you." "Okay, but I would have just sucked it up if I knew. Aren't you afraid of losing your reputation? Of what people would think when they see us together?" Lucia was curious. Logically speaking, a person of Dalen's standing should be very particular about his appearance, including the kind of company he keeps and marries. Or is it that he doesn't care? "Once your reputation reaches a certain height, not much can drag it down. Dressing being the last of the concerns," Dalen said carelessly. In the morning, when Lucia was still washing up in the bathroom, she heard John knock on the door and announce himself. When Lucia came out of the bathroom, she found John in her closet, fiddling with her clothes. He was taking out some of the clothes that weren't quite her style and replacing them with brand new pieces. "How about this today?" John asked as he held out a new floral jumpsuit that was exactly her size. She took it from his outstretched hands and held it in front of her body. She already knew that she'd love it. How had Dalen learned her style so quickly? After John left, she changed into her new clothes. Was this some new way for Dalen to torture her? Giving in to this one thing to hold it over her head when he wanted something later? Lucia shuddered at the thought, but after looking at her reflection and seeing how well the jumpsuit fit, she couldn't bring herself to take it off. If this was a game, Dalen definitely won this round. Lucia wore the jumpsuit to school that day, and during one of her class breaks, while Lucia and Cole were busy chatting, a handful of mud fell from the sky and landed on the two of them. "Ah!" Lucia looked down in horror at the brown spot that now covered the front of the jumpsuit. The two of them hurriedly stood up, shaking off the mud. Episode 30. Keep your hands off of him. Lucia raised her head to see who had dropped mud on them, only to see Macy above her leaning out on an open window. "Macy, what's the matter with you?" Lucia yelled, furious with her stepsister. "I have something to talk to you about," Macy said calmly, not even trying to explain why she just dumped mud on them. Macy had always made fun of Lucia for choosing this university, so Lucia was surprised Macy was even risking being spotted on this campus. "I have something to say to you, and if you don't shut up and listen, I'll keep throwing mud," Macy ordered. As Lucia's good friend, Cole naturally knew what kind of person Macy was, and immediately said, "We're happy to stand here and listen, but everyone else around can also hear and see you." Macy's expression immediately grimmed, and she shut her mouth, considering her options. "If you have anything to say, then say it. I don't have the time to waste on you," Lucia said impatiently. "Wait, fine. I don't even care. Just tell me, what's your relationship with Dalen?" Lucia was stunned. Why would Macy ask that? Did she know? Lucia had been so careful, and she was sure that Macy hadn't talked to Dalen since the anniversary party. "Why does it matter?" Lucia called back at Macy. "Because why would he come to our parents' wedding anniversary? They aren't that important. And I saw you in his car after class last night." Macy glared angrily. "How would I know why he came to the anniversary party? I just thought that Dad invited him. And as for last night, I don't know what you think you saw, but I was walking with Cole after class, so that couldn't have been me." Lucia nudged Cole with her elbow to get him to agree to her story. "Yep, she was with me all evening. We went and got some food together before going back to the dorms. Nothing else happened, Macy." "You must be seeing things," Cole said. "Do you think I'm blind? I know what Lucia looks like, and I recognized her ratty old t-shirt. Lucia, tell me honestly, have you become Dalen's lover? If you don't tell me the truth, I'll tell Dad." Lucia lowered her head and pinched the bridge of her nose between her thumb and index finger. Cole, who was standing at Lucia's side, couldn't hold back his laughter. Macy, I'm curious. Why are you suddenly so concerned about me? Last I checked, you couldn't care less about what I did, said Lucia. Because Mom and Dad agreed to let me marry Dalen, said Macy with obvious pride. Lucia's mouth dropped wide open. Did Dalen agree? Lucia asked. As long as Dad asks, Dalen probably won't refuse. The fact that he made an appearance at the anniversary party showed that he was very optimistic about our family. It would not be difficult to propose and get him to agree, Macy said with a dreamy, far-off look in her eyes. Didn't you just ask if Dalen going to the party had something to do with me? Macy was so angry that her face turned green. I will marry Dalen, so stay away from him. If I see you pulling stunts like you did last night, I'll never forgive you. Dalen's mine, so just keep your hands off of him. With that, Macy swung the window shut. Lucia looked at the building with a puzzled expression. I'm not sure how this mess with Macy even started, but now she's finally gone off about something I'm actually happy about. Honestly, her and Dalen deserve each other. But do you honestly think Dalen could be interested in her? Cole asked.